Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, how are you?
Very good. This is like perfect timing. I mean, everyone's talking these days about how we're either on the cusp of a recession or it's around the corner. So this is good times for somebody with your expertise, yeah?
Yeah, I think the timing is happening to work out. I mean, we'll be releasing the book in a week here, but I think it's really about people being able to be ready for a recession, figuring out how to leverage it so that they can rock the recession as opposed to getting rocked by it.
So to be clear, your point of view isn't, I don't want to make it sound like you're the kind of like an ambulance chaser waiting for a bad thing to happen or anything like that. Your point of view is actually that recessions can be great opportunities for individuals and businesses. Is that right? About right?
Yeah, the story is in the last recession, the Great Recession, I really had a tough time and was not prepared for it. And as such, it just didn't go well for me. And so I've promised never to go back there, to never have to do that again. And so spent a lot of time over the past 2 years figuring out who was really successful in the last recession, who really rocked the Great Recession, what did they do differently? And then the book is about how they did what they did that was different than so many of us who had a really tough time.
So I would love for you to share your story of how you experienced, let's call it, the last Great Recession. But before we do that, I want to do a quick rundown of what we'll be covering, and of course talking about a little bit about you and your background. So first, we're going to go over. Jonathan has four key ideas about why recessions can be an opportunity for our businesses, and maybe even we'll jump into some examples for professional businesses such as myself. I'm an attorney here in New York. I also work with a lot of online entrepreneurs. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit. And for the rest of our audience who may be in more corporate type situations, how these same principles may be able to apply to just general personal finance type ideas. Does that sound like a good roadmap for us, Jonathan?
Yeah, let's get after it.
Cool. So yeah, why don't we jump in with your experience from the last time around? Yeah.
Yes. So what was going on is that I owned a fitness business. So it was a personal training business and it was a franchise. And we didn't have a plan for the recession. And I wasn't really thinking through that the worst possible business to be situated in for a recession is high-end personal training. You're the first thing to get cut when a recession hits, and I just didn't see it coming, didn't think about it. And so recession hit, and a lot of our clients started to work out at home, or they would make cutbacks in terms of discretionary services, and personal training is at the top of that list. It's like how if you're positioned and you're in the hotel business, if you're a high-end restaurant, then you're going to be one of the first services, one of the first luxury items to go in a recession.
Which, by the way, is
And
not
so
great that we as Americans consider fitness discretionary spending. You know, it should be top priority. But please go on.
No, well, yeah, and of course, selfishly, that's what I was telling myself. But again, we start to ladder down, right? So in terms of if you're using a personal trainer, it doesn't mean you stop working out.
True.
It just means that you maybe hit the running path more on your own because that's a less expensive way, or maybe you get a membership to the Y, or maybe you already have a membership to the Y, you aren't using it. And so now instead of your expensive personal trainer that comes to your house or you're going to them, you're actually going to use that service. So in any case, the way that I survived is that I borrowed over $250,000 from my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the reaction I get a lot. And the worst part, Anthony, is that I want you to think about it this way. I didn't borrow the money all at once. I really borrowed it in $20,000 chunks. So every 2 weeks when we had payroll, I would make another phone call. And I'd be like, hey, Mom, how are you doing? How's it going? Make a little small talk. And then I'd be like, I need you to help me out with another check. And that was over a dozen phone calls groveling for money. And
Was there a
so
point
the
where
book,
was there a point where your mom you noticed she would answer the phone on the third ring or the fifth ring, depending on towards the end of this experience?
Oh yeah, I have actually, as part of when I'm doing this as a like a keynote presentation, I actually have a recording of one of our actual calls,
Ooh.
and I play it for the audience, and it gets the biggest cringe factor because it's so painful.
Uh,
But in any case, yeah, the she was sending me to voicemail, and so in any case, but she hooked me up. She stood by me, and now fortunately have been able to repay her in full. But the whole point of the book, the whole point of all this stuff, why I'm doing all the podcasts, I don't want other people to have to borrow money from their mother-in-law in the next recession. I want them to figure out ways that they can rock the recession. And so that's really what the book's about. Because I think the story, like, the story about most recessions is you should just survive it and just do what you need to do. That's not really all that exciting to me. I like the angle of forget that, forget just turtling up and surviving. How are we going to pounce in the next recession? How are we going to figure out how to use it as a massive opportunity for growth?
I love it. I mean, everyone with the quote unquote common sense is to buy low and sell high, right? And what lower low is there than during a recession? So just in sort of that, two-bit advice kind of point of view, it does seem like it could be a great opportunity in many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's lots of different ways to look at that. I mean, you could buy another company, you could buy assets from another company, or right now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's a pretty good war for talent going on.
Mm-hmm.
Unemployment's at record lows. It hasn't been this low in what over like 50 years. And so in a recession, a talent is going to become available again. And so the coaching is for people to think through, how do I get ahead of that? How do I get ahead of it so that when CNN, MSNBC is announcing that we're in a recession, I just go to my list of talent and start calling them and bring them over to my firm to practice with me as opposed to wherever they might be right now. Because I'm sure a lot of your audience, I'm sure a lot of the lawyers that listen in are thinking, I can't, all the good people are taken. They're all happy where they are. So the recession's a great opportunity to start to win talent again.
Do you have an inverse philosophy, meaning when the economy is really frothy and hot, do you recommend or think about maybe pulling back on hiring or not being as aggressive because for fear of overpaying, and like using a sports analogy, when the free agent market is, when those left-handed pitchers are going for 200 $300 million contracts, do you kind of pull back when things are going a little overboard? Yeah.
I wouldn't. And so philosophically, I don't know if you've ever read the book Hyper Sales Growth by Jack Daly, but that's a great book for your audience to consider. And you don't even have to read the whole thing. You could just read the chapter on hiring. I know this is sick, but I think it's chapter 6. You should read that book because Jack talks about looking at hiring as a process and not an event. Mm-hmm. And in so many cases, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as solopreneurs, or in our own practice, we look at hiring as an event. Somebody quits and then all of a sudden we want to put an ad out. We want to hire a recruiter or we want to hire. I prefer to look at it more as something that's always ongoing, just because I think it's too tough to spool up and spool down on hiring. Yeah. It requires such a huge effort that I know it's like timing the market, man. I'm not a big fan of timing the market, nor am I a big fan of trying to time hiring. It's just something you're always doing. But in a recession, it should be a lot easier for you to get a talent.
It's like your dollar cost averaging your talent into your company.
Yeah, I think so. And then you're also setting yourself up. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't turn off hiring right now, but I would prefer to push the green button and go heavier when we're in a recessionary time so that we're not overpaying for talent. So I just philosophically, though, I don't want the audience to think that they should just chill out right now and wait because it's just so hard to get the hiring question solved on that one issue.
Now, I love how you talk about recession. The term recession is not necessarily confined to an economic event or a macroeconomic event, let's call it. And you talk about how recession can really apply to a variety of even individualized or company specific circumstances, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm trying to customize this to your audience too, and think about like we all, as professional service providers, have that one great client, that one really juicy one that they're great on paying our fees. They pay on time immediately. They give us lots of hours. It seems like if we're having a tough month, we can just call them and tell them we need some work, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I got a project I need some time on, actually." And so we don't think through that if you lose your biggest client, if you lose that client that brings you 10%, 20%, 30% of your revenue, it doesn't matter what's happening in your industry. It doesn't matter what's happening in the economy. You're in a recession. And so many of us don't have a plan for what we're going to do when we get that phone call from a major client. And so we go into a tailspin. They call and they go, "Look, it's not you, Anthony, it's me. My partner's wife's brother-in-law is a lawyer now, and we're going to go with him for a while. And I know you've helped us out for a long time, and we love you. But basically, I'm going to go with my wife because otherwise it's going to be painful." You're in a recession. So what do? All of a sudden, you're emotional. You start going through the range of emotions. At first, you're in denial. Maybe he'll call me back. He'll realize the error of his ways. Then maybe you go into bargaining. And you call him back and you're like, "Look, we've been together for 2 years. I've made you a lot of money. I've saved a lot of risk. I'll take 30% off my fees." And then
This
you're
sounds
into
really
anger.
familiar. Is this from like How to Deal with a Breakup or Alcoholics Anonymous? It sounds really familiar, these steps.
Exactly. So the point is, I want you to go through this range of emotions now in the cool, rational light of day, so that in a recession, whether or not it's driven by the economy or driven by your biggest client leaving you, you can just go to action and execution instead of spending so much time being emotional and trying to get back on the horse.
So how much time should we spend planning, or I guess creating this plan? I guess it's a two-part question. How much time should we spend creating this plan, and how long should this plan be good for? So for example, the last big downturn, macroeconomic downturn, was in the 2009. So, I mean, some would say that we've been due, quote unquote, for another pullback or drawdown since 2016, 17-ish. So if I had crafted my plan in 2012, right, thinking that in that next 4 or 5 years something would happen, is my plan stale at that point? And how much time should I invest for this 4-ish year plan? If those numbers make sense, by the way. Correct me if I'm kind of off the wheels here a little bit.
So Paul and I, my co-author, we're recommending 16 hours of time to create the initial plan. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't have to be in one 16-hour marathon session. I would think through maybe 4 4-hour sessions with your leadership team if you're at a company. And if you're a solopreneur or it's your practice, then I would do 4 4-hour sessions. And I would think about taking a copy of the Rock the Recession workbook, taking a pencil or pen, and then going to your favorite Starbucks and doing 4 4-hour sessions with the workbook. And then there's also like a what's it called, a fillable PDF version if you're one of those people that wants to type it up. But the whole point of that is that 16 hours to get the initial, and then I think you're really revising it every 6 months. You're pulling it out and polishing it up. When we're in a recession, I would cut the frequency to more like each month. You should be looking at it and reviewing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And look, the recession plan, again, is really good business hygiene. So a lot of the exercises in it are going to make your company stronger regardless of whether or not we're in a recession. So I don't want you to think it's just in a recession, but we covered it earlier. It's like if you lose your biggest client, you're going to go to this recession plan that you've already put together. Say your 3 best employees leave and they go across the street and start a competing firm. You want to pull out your recession plan at that point. I don't. Has that ever happened to you or anybody in your audience? That never happens with law firms.
I had a
right?
similar experience, not leaving to start a competing firm, but I guess a key man, one of my best paralegals, decided to get married. How selfish of her, right? And and left. And I mean, how dare she? But
I know.
the workload that she was responsible for, to reallocate that was a sudden change for me. Let's put it that way.
Right. And so all of a sudden, you're panicking, you're running around, you're trying to find a top recruiter, you're doing all these things. Instead of just going your plan, already having the recruiter's info there, and then being able to just send them a note that we're at DEF CON 1, we just had a top paralegal leave. Here's the collateral that we need to publish. Let's put it on these different sites. Let's have you start reaching out. And then also you would have the names of your top 5 paralegal candidates, paralegals that you'd love to hire that are already happy at another firm, but you've been staying in touch with them. You've been letting them know what's going on at your firm, just maybe once a quarter. And then you can call them and say, hey, look, we've got an opportunity here. My top paralegal left. She's one of those millennials that wanted to have a family. Can you believe it? But we've got an opportunity, so I don't know where you're at. But if you want, let's grab coffee. So you've got that list of 5 people you can pivot to right away, instead of starting from a blank sheet of paper and a blank screen.
What about those are great examples, by the way. Losing the anchor, the whale client, whatever you want to call it, or a key man, or what about something that's a little less predictable, like a technological change or regulatory change that really impacts your business? I think, for example, we have a lot of realtors who listen, and this new player called Compass Realty. I don't know if you have that where you are. They're very
we do.
Yeah, they're like a really algorithmic and like online based competitor that's entering the market in a lot of cities. And I don't know with great detail, but my understanding is it's causing a lot of waves. And it's perhaps something that was not really foreseeable. I mean, are you able to? How do you plan for that, or for things like that?
In my head, something that's unforeseeable is that you discover that your CFO or your controller embezzled $1 million from you. So like that, and we can. I suppose you should have good enough financial controls that you can make sure that doesn't happen. But that's more the unforeseeable. It's harder for me to believe that something like technological change like Compass is really all of a sudden. Like these things in general, like the artificial intelligence, algorithmic thinking, the in the construction industry, the fact that there are robots that can lay bricks, all of these things foreshadow where the world is going. So I don't think any of us can claim surprise. It's something like an algorithmic real estate agent displacing a lot of how things have been done. The question is, do we have a plan for how we're going to leverage that, how we're going to combat that? Or are we just closing our eyes, sticking our head in the sand, and then hoping that our industry won't evolve?
Yeah. I mean, that you're right. It's all, the writing is on the wall in many different cases. I think maybe the problem is that either from laziness or just stubbornness, we don't want to see it sometimes,
Yeah, I mean, I think for all industries, like there are very few industries that won't be disrupted by technological change moving forward. And the pace of disruption is increasing as well. So it's not because we have better communication tools. So before there was video conferencing, before there was television, before there was phones, everything took longer. The information took longer to spread. But now we're in a global economy. I work with a designer on Upwork. I don't know if do you use like Upwork.com?
I'm more of a Fiverr person, but I've used Upwork.
Yeah. Okay, so same thing as Fiverr.
Yeah.
I love Fiverr and Upwork, but she is based in South Africa. And Yasmin, if you're listening, love you. But I'll send her a project, and her time is ahead of mine. When I wake up in the morning, she'll have a draft of whatever it is to me. And so I'm just making the point that as we think through technologically, that's what we're competing against now. That's where we have to be. And if we don't wake up to it, then the world's just going to pass us by. But the good news is that if you are one of the professionals that takes the time to read the journals, to think through what it looks like to compete with a Compass, that's really the meat of the recession plan. Like, what does that need to look like so that you can make the case in your marketing that they're using an algorithm, they're not using your 25 years of experience in the market. And so I don't know exactly what that looks like for realtors, but that's the sort of stuff that I want you getting a nice latte and thinking about for that 16 hours at Starbucks.
It's funny that you mentioned Upwork and Fiverr, because that would turned out to be part of my, I guess, rock my recession plan when my paralegal, got happily married. But putting together almost creating a Franken paralegal out of various freelancers, right? And to cover the gap between when I was able to hire somebody and somebody up to the standards of what I needed versus just getting the work done in the interim. So yeah, the gig economy and the freelance marketplace is a really, really great resource. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, I think a lot of times what happens is we think that those things are only applicable to like the Fortune 500, that they're the only ones that need to pay attention to millennials, and they're the only ones that need to pay attention to the gig economy. I think it's a shame because a lot of that stuff applies more to solopreneurs than it does to a 500 plus employee company. And we can really leverage that. I mean, the gig economy is great for us because you don't have to have somebody on your payroll running the meter full time. And so there's massive opportunity if we're smart enough to think through how people want to work these days that's different than how they did back when it was 30 years and a gold watch.
So, okay, you mentioned earlier you don't necessarily think that technological changes are so unforeseeable. For our online entrepreneur listeners, I mean, the big fear that's always out there is if you get deplatformed. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. So if I'm making all of my money on Twitter or on Amazon or on YouTube, for example, and for whatever reason I've either accidentally or because I'm towing the line, I've broken the rules on that platform and I've been banned. And I mean that can be crushing for an online entrepreneur. Is that something that everyone who's making money online should be building into their Rock the Recession plan, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you answered your own question. So it's I mean, dude, that was a leading question, which I would expect nothing less from an attorney. So I totally get it. But
I'm like, just thinking out loud.
If you're, exactly. If you're not on multiple platforms, then I think that's shame on you. But for me, a lot of why I want to be an entrepreneur, a lot of what I love is being able to steer my own ship. And I hate being beholden to anybody. I hate the feeling of having an employee having a gun to my head. And so I am always looking for ways that I've got a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D. And if the only option for you is to be on Amazon, or the only option for you is to be on YouTube, then you're building a massive amount of risk into your business. And that's not risk that I would personally be comfortable with. But if that works for you, great. Just know that in the next recession, whether it's a personal one or an economic one, you may get crushed. So I'm not super comfortable with that. And that's why I'm always striving to make it so that if I have 20 clients and each of them accounts for 5% of my revenue and one of them cuts me, then I'm not deplatformed. I'm moving on. I'm on to the next thing. As solopreneurs, as internet entrepreneurs, we all have the opportunity to make that decision. So it's just a calculated risk.
So you mentioned plan, A, B, C, and D even. What happens when, despite all the effort, despite all the forethought and the 16 hours, I mean, just life, sometimes life just rolls this way. Your plans are not firing. They're not working the way you planned them to be. What do you do then? I mean, what is the total backstop plan or approach, I guess?
Yeah. So in the Rock the Recession book, in the Rock the Recession workbook, we call it our emergency brake. So if all this stuff I'm talking about isn't working, if you're still headed to crash into the wall, you yank on the emergency brake. And what we're recommending that we've seen work for all the other companies that we've interviewed that were successful is a 4-tiered emergency brake plan. So what you would do is figure out it may be revenue, which is an easy one. So say you're a solopreneur, you're selling $1 million of whatever online each year. And say all of a sudden you see that you're trending for 800,000. What would be the expenses that you would cut in order to make sure that you still stay profitable or at least break even? I want you to list those out, and we call that tier 1 of our emergency brake plan. Say you see your revenue continue to decline and it's declining to 700,000. Then you're going to activate tier 2. You're going to already have planned out what are the cuts at this level that I'm going to make to really make sure that I can still stay profitable at the $700,000 revenue level. At tier 3, this is where it sucks, really sucks. You're going to be cutting people. So if you have people working for you, this is where you're probably going to need to reduce headcount to stay profitable. If you're a solopreneur, this is the point where you're going to reduce your own salary, maybe take no salary to keep going. And then the last tier, tier 4, that would be the deepest level of cuts. So this is where you're at the fight or flight, at the point of survival. If you're a company, you may be cutting an entire division at this point. If you're a solopreneur, you're definitely at zero pay for now, and you're just figuring out how you're going to get back on track for growth. You're protecting the beehive. At the end of the day, if your practice folds or your business folds, then you've got nothing. You're just starting over. So at this point, you're doing whatever you have to make sure that you protect the hive. So
I feel like for a solopreneur, the thing you must protect at all costs, because you can for most solopreneurs, you can't exist with a smartphone and your mind, right? You need to protect your brand at all costs and make sure you don't damage, go negative on your I guess brand is the best word, yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that translates well. And so if you can prevent yourself from going into bankruptcy because that will damage your brand, that may be one thing to consider. But the other thing to consider is that sometimes bankruptcy is the best option. And if it is, then I know that this is a subject probably more about than I do, unfortunately. But if it is, then maybe not delaying and forestalling it, but maybe figuring out the best way to go through it in a managed way instead of doing it in a free fall. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there are getting the clock rolling, or what do you call it? Yeah, getting the clock running. There's some benefits to that. To putting it in your past as soon as possible. There's definitely some benefits to that as well. And yeah, most bankruptcies are like this managed process over months and years. So yeah, it's not gonna. If the day you make the decision is not when things are going to happen. So maybe making the decision sooner so that you can get to the next level, the next step, getting a guardianship trustee appointed, or a bankruptcy trustee appointed, and so forth. Yeah, for sure. So let's try to spin some of this great advice to the personal realm, because we do have a lot of listeners who are employees in companies, well-to-do. I guess you could call it their household is what they're trying to manage and make sure that they don't suffer through a personal recession. How do some of these principles apply to the individual level?
So the Rock the Recession book, some of our working titles were like Rock Your Life, and Dominate the Downturn, Crush the Crash, because a lot of this really is stuff that I'm doing in my personal life that a lot of the other people that I interview in the book are doing in their personal lives. So it translates nicely. So for your household, it's thinking through, if we're a dual income household and one of us loses our job, then it doesn't matter why you lost the job. Your household is in a recession. So what's the plan? What are we going to cut if we had to live on one income instead of both incomes? And then wargaming out, if it's one person's income and that's a higher income, then what would we do? If it's the other partner or spouse's income and they go away, what would we do? I'm just saying, I think it's better. I know with my wife, it's better to have that conversation now than when things get real. Because I'd rather talk through now, I'm going to stop eating out, you're going to stop going to the salon as often. I'd rather do that now than when we're forced to. because then I know that there's going to be a lot of tough conversations, and I'm selfish, so I don't want to lose. And I just know that the salon will be the last thing to go if we don't discuss it now when we're all chill. You know what I'm saying?
This is going to get you in trouble, man. this whole episode.
No, I don't think my wife. I'm just not going to tell her about this interview.
Okay. So this is I'm gonna get a little new agey on you, or from a different perspective, maybe head in the sand kind of. A lot of people believe that what you put out there will happen, or increases the likelihood that it'll happen. The more you think about or write down something, kind of like affirmations, yeah. So some might feel that sitting down and spending so much time planning for hard times may, in fact, increase the likelihood or accelerate these hard times for you. What are your thoughts on that sort of a philosophical approach? Yeah.
Well, so to go with it, I think that recessions in our personal lives or in business or in the economy are cyclical. It's like the seasons of the year. It's like spring, summer, fall, winter. It's a cycle. And so saying that if you think about winter, we're going to have winter would be the parallel in my head. I don't think thinking about the weather is going to change the weather. And I don't think that thinking about a recession is going to change whether or not we have one. It's just a matter of time for all of us. So agnostic of whether or not consumers being depressed and that depressed spending will lead us into a recession, that is the case. I mean, if consumers all start to think recession and pull back, it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot of psychology there. Yeah.
Yeah. But to answer your question, to say that if we think about sad times or tough times in our lives, that will cause them, I don't think that's the case. There are just some certain inevitable things that we're all going to have bad days, bad months, bad years. And I would just rather plan for mine now so that when I get my fair share, I don't have to be acting out of emotion, that I can be acting out of a logical place.
It's almost like you're building up some muscle memory for a stressful situation, so you're not reacting with emotion during that time, but rather just execute. Yeah, I mean, gosh, I'm just kind of spitting back what you're already saying, but I just wanted to say muscle memory.
Yeah, no, I like that analogy. I think that is. I mean, when we think about it, it's like when you're driving, you need to practice like what you're going to do evasively if you get into, like, I know up in Cleveland here, we've got a lot of snowy driving. If your car starts to spin out, you want to turn into it. Right. And most people just start yanking the wheel or slam on the brakes. So it's the same thing here. I just want people to have that muscle memory that when they start to spin out and the world suddenly collapses to a few nanoseconds, that you know to just turn into it because you've practiced that, because you've thought through it. Otherwise, you're just going to crash.
Or you'll react who knows how, yeah.
And if you just go with that plan, you're going to be borrowing over $250,000 from your mother-in-law.
I wonder where that would fall into the emergency brake plan at this point. Is that an F, a G, an H, or hopefully a Z?
It depends if you ask me or my wife how each of us feels about ever borrowing money from my mother-in-law again.
Oh, can you just make sure? I don't like leaving on a bad note or on unresolved situations. Can you just make sure that everyone knows how that situation ended for you? Because if I recall correctly, it was not too bad.
Yeah, no. It's I totally paid her back. Actually, paid her back using a lot of the thoughts in the book. So further validation. She helped me with the book. We're on great terms and have a great relationship. I'm very, very fortunate in terms of mother-in-laws that she was willing to be that supportive. I don't know if a lot of mothers-in-law would be. And then I think it really, in all honesty, brought us closer together. So gave us an opportunity to have more and deeper conversations than we would have otherwise. Still probably not worth the 12 phone calls, but all in all, it ended well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I did read that hardship is what bonds us human beings the most. So that's why we go on these horrible camping trips that are miserable and things like that. So we actually just form stronger bonds that way and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd prefer the audience go camping
Yeah.
versus borrow money. You get to the same painful place, I'm assuming.
All right, Jonathan, that's all I have. Can you tell us when the book's come out and where to find it?
Yeah, the book is Rock the Recession. It is coming out on this Tuesday, which will be September 17th. And then it'll be available on Amazon, also available on our website, which is recession.com. Yes, that really is our website. So, and then, the audience can find the workbook there, and also can find my contact info if there's any follow-up for creating a recession plan in their personal or business life. Happy to help.
Yeah. So aside from the book, do you and your partner offer? I guess it's business consulting in this area, or is it just the book?
So generally, there's a couple different levels. We've got the book, and we've got a workbook that people can get on recession.com. We also have a free assessment. And so if anybody contacts me, I tell them to just start there. It's 20 questions. It takes 5 minutes, and it will tell you how prepared you are on a scale of green, yellow, or red to rock the next recession. And then you can do that. From there, you can buy a report that tells you specific tips, given your response on the assessment, what you should be doing, and then the workbook and the book. And then for people that want one-on-one consulting, we do that too, either by Zoom or in person.
Awesome. Sounds like something that could be useful for a lot of people who, it takes perspective. I mean, the younger folks might not realize how hard it was in 2008 or even 2001 during the dot-com. So for those of us who have been through it, we appreciate that this might be something to take a look at,
Yeah, well, I mean, in a lot of the companies that I'm working with, if your company wasn't formed back in 2008 or 2009, if you started in 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and you've never been through a recession, then one of the things that I would do immediately is get a board of advisors together, especially with some people that have recession experience, and just talk through what that looked like for them, and then come up with the start of your plan as well. It doesn't have to be anything really formal, but look, if people haven't been through it themselves, trust me, you don't want the first time that you're trying to figure all this out to be when Fox News, when CNN, when it's all that they're talking about. That'll just be scary.
Very. I can only imagine. Yeah. All right. Hey, that's all I have. I'm gonna let you go. I know you're a busy guy, but I thank you for coming on and sharing your ideas. Hang on, but when I sign off, let's just say goodbye to the audience for now. Yeah.
Cool. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.